I stopped believing in family long before I hit 10. My name is Eric. I'm 28 years old. I live in White Plains, New York. But the story starts when I was 5. It was raining so hard that day, the kind of thunderstorm that makes the sky look bruised. I was coloring on the floor, nothing fancy, just cheap crayons and printer paper when the knock came. Sharp, urgent. My foster mom, Diane, opened the door. 2 cops in soaked uniforms stood there. I'll never forget the way they looked at each other before speaking. One of them crouched down to my level, like I was already broken. Your parents were in a car accident, he said. They were driving on I-84. Their car hydroplaned during the storm, went off the road into a ravine. It was instant. He said it was painless. I nodded like I understood. But even at 5, I knew what he really meant. They were gone. I don't remember crying. Not then. I remember Diane holding me tight and me going limp. Not because I trusted her, but because I didn't know what else to do. No uncles. No aunts. No one stepped up. No family photos. No emergency calls. No suitcases packed with care. 2 weeks later, I was in a group home in Yonkers. It wasn't a nightmare. Nightmares end. This didn't. The place was fine, I guess. It had bunk beds, peanut butter sandwiches, old board games with missing pieces. The staff was decent. They'd ask how your day was, but never waited for the answer. You got clothes from donation boxes, toys from expired clearance sales, but not once did anyone call me son. Every night, I went to bed hoping someone would walk in and say, "We found your family. You're going home." But that never happened. Instead, I memorized the ceiling tiles. I learned how to stay quiet. I learned how to fold my pain into silence. Kids came and went. Some got adopted. Some didn't. I started to figure out patterns. Who smiled too big when couples visited? Who wet the bed and got yelled at? Who clung too tightly to the idea of being wanted? I stopped drawing. I stopped speaking much, too. What was the point? It wasn't like anybody was listening. That was my life. The before. Then came that spring afternoon. It was raining again. Lighter this time. I was sitting in the common room building a puzzle that had no picture on the box, so half the pieces didn't even belong. One of the staffers, a lady named Carla, tapped my shoulder. "You're wanted in the office," she said. That was usually bad. Usually meant someone had acted out or someone's caseworker had changed. I walked the hallway slow, dragging my feet. But when I got to the office, Carla didn't go in with me. She opened the door and gestured me forward like it was some kind of ceremony. Inside, 2 people stood by the window. A man and a woman. Both tall, well-dressed, expensive smell. The man had silver cufflinks and the woman had lipstick that didn't smudge on her teeth. They looked like they belonged on TV. The man crouched down, not like the cop did, but in a way that made him seem bigger, somehow. "Eric," he said, "we've been hoping to meet you." I stared at them, mute. I didn't know what to say. The woman smiled. "We've read all about you. You're exactly the boy we've been looking for." That's the first time I felt it, the shift. Something was about to change. And I had no idea what kind of world I was about to enter. The folks who took me in were the Ashcrofts, Allen, and Meredith. If you've lived anywhere near Westchester County, the name probably rings a bell. They own half the commercial real estate downtown, luxury condos, office buildings, even the giant golf resort in Rye. When I first walked into their house, I thought I had stepped into a movie. Marble floors that made your footsteps echo. A chandelier that looked like it belonged in a palace. Walls so white you were scared to breathe on them. There was staff, actual staff, in uniforms. Cooks, cleaners, a driver who wore gloves even in the summer. That first night, they took me to my new room. It was bigger than the entire dorm floor back at the group home. The bed had 100 pillows and blankets so soft I didn't know what to do with them. The bathroom had gold faucets and a mirror that lit up when you walked in. "You're part of the family now," Meredith said, brushing imaginary lint off my shirt. Alan just nodded from the hallway. "Let us know if you need anything." They didn't hug me. They didn't kneel down or say they were glad I was there. They just looked satisfied, like a box had been checked. The next morning, I was fitted for a suit. 2 tailors came to the house and took my measurements like I was royalty. Meredith watched, arms crossed, nodding in approval as they pulled fabric swatches in front of her. "He's a fast grower," she said. "Let's be generous with the seams." That afternoon, a private tutor showed up with a leather briefcase and a voice like a PBS narrator. "This will be your new curriculum," Meredith told me. "Rigorous but manageable. You're bright, aren't you?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just nodded. That became my go-to move. Nod and stay quiet. They fed me steak on Tuesdays, duck confit on Thursdays. Everything was plated like it belonged on magazine covers. If I ever asked for ketchup or mac and cheese, Meredith's smile would tighten. "Let's expand your palate, darling. We're not peasants." And just like that, I learned to swallow without complaint. What they didn't serve was family. They never said I was adopted. Not officially. Not to anyone. At dinners or galas or charity luncheons, they introduced me as their nephew from overseas. When people asked where I was from, Alan would cut in before I could answer. Family from Europe, he'd say with a grin. You know how complicated these things can get. If anyone pressed, I was told to smile and deflect. Say boarding school. Say exchange program. Never say group home. Never say Yonkers. Never say parents. They made sure I had everything a kid could want. Tailored clothes, a new iPad every fall, ski trips to Vail, Italian leather shoes. But they never said son. They never asked what scared me. Never asked if I missed anyone. Never asked who I used to be. And I got it. I did. They weren't adopting a boy. They were acquiring a symbol, a piece of PR, a polished gem to display when needed and hide when inconvenient. I remember one night, I came downstairs in my pajamas, something simple, just sweats and a t-shirt. Meredith was hosting a fundraiser. There were men in tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like water. She saw me and froze. Walked over and touched my sleeve like it was offensive. You can't be down here like this, she whispered. Go back upstairs. Now. I nodded. I always nodded. I went back to my room and watched the party from the window, faces blurring behind champagne glasses. That's when it hit me. I wasn't their son. I was their secret. A dressed up, well-fed, perfectly presented secret. And in that silence, in that golden prison, I started forgetting my old name, my parents' faces, the sound of my mother's laugh. They had given me everything, except belonging. I met Rachel during a psychology seminar at SUNY Purchase. The class was supposed to be an easy elective, intro-level stuff, discussions about identity and childhood development. I didn't expect anything deep. I definitely didn't expect her. She sat 2 rows over, always in hoodies, always with a pin tapping between her fingers like she was drumming out some internal melody. She was the kind of girl who raised her hand without raising her voice. And when she laughed, it wasn't loud, but it had this bounce, this weightlessness, like nothing in the world could knock her over. First time we really spoke was during a group assignment. She looked at me, tilted her head, and said, "You always look like you're waiting for someone to accuse you of something." I didn't know what to say. I think I laughed. Probably awkward. She grinned. "It's okay. I look like I'm daring someone to try." That was Rachel. We clicked fast. Same dry sense of humor. Same sarcasm as armor. Same weird childhood bruises, hers more emotional, mine hidden in marble and gold. We started studying together, then grabbing coffee, then lingering longer after every class, just talking about nothing and everything. She didn't flinch when I told her I didn't remember the sound of my parents' voices. She didn't blink when I said I was adopted by rich people who never let me call them mom or dad. "You made it," she said one day, her legs stretched across the library bench. "That's what counts." "No," I told her. "I survived." "That's different." She didn't argue. She just leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Well, I'm glad you did." That's when I knew. She was it. Not in some movie style, violins playing kind of way. Just a quiet certainty. Like my body stopped bracing for the next rejection. She asked questions no one else had ever cared to ask. About the group home. About the Ashcrofts. About what it felt like to grow up in a house where love was performance-based. "You ever miss them?" she asked once. "Miss who?" "Your parents. The ones before." I shrugged. I was 5. Sometimes I think I remember them, but I might just be filling in the blanks. She looked at me for a long time before saying, "That's heavy." And then, "You want to try remembering anyway?" We built new memories instead. First date at this grimy diner that served pancakes all day. She dipped her fries in maple syrup and told me I needed to stop judging her life choices. We stayed till closing time, talking about nothing and everything, her foot nudging mine under the table. First kiss on a train platform during winter break. She had hot chocolate on her lip. I leaned in. She laughed into my mouth and said, "You're not as smooth as you think you are." But not everything was easy. She had family too. Her mother, Cheryl, was polite the way a snake is polite before it strikes. Her dad barely spoke more than 2 words at a time. They were clean-cut, well-mannered, suburban to the bone. And they didn't like me. Didn't say it outright. But I felt it every time I walked in the door. The way Cheryl offered coffee, but never eye contact. The way her dad answered me with nods instead of words. Rachel noticed. Of course she did. But she always brushed it off. "They just don't get it yet," she'd say. "They will." Still, the dinners grew awkward. The pauses got longer. The looks got heavier. One night, after Cheryl referred to me as Rachel's friend from school for the 5th time, I finally asked, "Is this what it's going to be like forever?" Rachel looked at me. I soft. "They just need time." I wanted to believe her. Because with her, I felt more human than I ever had. Not a project. Not a symbol. Not a secret. She knew my scars. And instead of flinching, she held them. And maybe, just maybe, I thought I could finally belong to someone, not just somewhere. Thanksgiving at Rachel's parents' house was polite torture. Everyone dressed like they were about to shoot a magazine spread. Cheryl had 3 kinds of silverware laid out for each place setting. There were name cards, candle centerpieces, and a curated playlist of soft jazz that made me feel like I was trapped inside a dentist's waiting room. I wore a navy button-down and khakis, tried to play the part. Rachel squeezed my hand under the table as we walked in. Her signal, "You've got this." But the second we stepped into the dining room, I knew I didn't. "Eric," Cheryl said with that polished smile. "Nice of you to join us. Not welcome, not good to see you. Just nice of you to join us." Like I was a late substitute. No one stood when we entered. No one offered a drink or even a casual hello. They just gave nods, distant, like I was someone's co-worker who wandered into the wrong family reunion. During dinner, they made small talk about ski vacations, investment accounts, new Teslas. Rachel tried to loop me in, asked me about a recent book I was reading, made a joke about how I still didn't know how to make a decent omelet, but no one followed her lead. Cheryl didn't ask me a single question all evening, not even the fake kind like, "How's school?" or "What are you studying?" She just smiled that stiff smile and talked around me. I felt invisible. Again, it was worse because I could see Rachel struggling to fix it. She kept glancing at me, offering little smiles like life preservers, but the water was rising too fast. The first holiday I ever spent with them, I sat on the couch alone while Rachel went with her parents to church. "They don't know you," she'd whispered, kissing me before she left. "It's just easier this way. Next time, I'll fight harder." There was no next time. Every invitation after that came with a disclaimer. Maybe just dinner, not overnight. Maybe lunch, not Thanksgiving. Maybe not this time at all. Eventually, I asked her straight up, "So what am I to you?" A secret. We were lying on her futon, her head on my chest. She didn't answer right away. "I'm just scared," she said finally. "Scared of what they'll say? Of losing their support. You don't get it. My family is complicated." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I grew up in a house where people called me a nephew from overseas. I know all about complicated. She looked up at me, eyes glossy. "I'm not them. I love you." "I know," I said, "but love doesn't fix everything." Silence stretched between us, the kind that feels more like a wall than a pause. A week later, she surprised me with a picnic in the park where we had our first date. It was cold out, mid-March, but she had packed hot soup and gloves and those cheap hand warmers I liked. We sat on a bench under bare trees, watching ducks waddle along the edge of the pond. Then she turned to me and pulled out a tiny box. Not velvet, not dramatic, just simple. "Marry me," she said. I blinked. "Are you serious?" She nodded. "I don't care what they think anymore. I want you. Us." My heart thudded against my ribs. Part of me wanted to shout yes. Another part wanted to ask, "But do you want me in the light or just in private?" I didn't ask. I just nodded. Okay, because I loved her. Because even ghosts want to be seen. Her parents' anniversary party was held at the Briarcliff Country Club. Crystal chandeliers, valet parking, coat check, the whole 9 yards. When we pulled into the circular driveway, a man in a tuxedo opened Rachel's door before I even shut off the engine. Inside, everything was white and gold and softly lit, like a wedding catalog. Waiters floated past with flutes of champagne. People stood in tight circles, laughing that high-pitched, too loud kind of laugh that never touches the eyes. Rachel held my hand tight. She'd even picked out my suit, charcoal gray, slim fit. Said I looked expensive, said it would help. But as we walked in, the room practically shifted to avoid me. No one greeted me. Not her aunt, not her cousins, not even Cheryl. They gave her hugs and air kisses, and then they glanced at me like I was her Uber driver who had wandered in. Her mother finally acknowledged me when she spotted us near the back. "Oh," Cheryl said with that cold, glossy smile. "You came." "Of course he did," Rachel said, too fast. Cheryl's eyes flicked around the room. "Well, we weren't sure. Seating's a little tight, but there are some extra chairs in the kitchen." I blinked. The kitchen. We just hadn't planned on everyone bringing guests, she said, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. Rachel flinched beside me. I looked around. There were at least 50 people seated at perfectly arranged round tables. All smiling, all sipping, all included. And then there was us. "We don't need chairs," I said, quiet but firm. Cheryl blinked like she hadn't heard me. Rachel tugged on my sleeve. "We can stand," she whispered. "It's fine." "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "It's not." We stood there for a second, the 3 of us, in a frozen triangle of tension. Then I let go of her hand, turned slowly, and walked back toward the lobby. Rachel followed. No one stopped us. Not her dad, not her mother, not a single person. Out in the parking lot. The cold air hit hard. I took a deep breath and leaned against the passenger door. Rachel was trembling. They didn't mean it like that. I gave a bitter laugh. They meant it exactly like that. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, hurt. You didn't have to say it like that. You made it awkward. I stared at her for a moment. Awkward, I said, voice low. They told me to go get a chair from the kitchen like I was the help. She shook her head. You're twisting it. No, I'm finally seeing it. She crossed her arms, lips tight. Why do you always have to make things harder than they are? I wanted to say, because pretending doesn't make it better. Because I was tired of being the ghost again. Because every time I let this slide, a piece of me disappeared. But instead, I just said, you didn't stand up for me. She looked like she wanted to cry, but she didn't. She just said, let's go home. So we did, but it didn't feel like home anymore. And something inside me, something small but important, cracked. Right there, between the folding chairs and the fake smiles. After the anniversary party, things didn't explode. They just stopped. Rachel didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't say a single thing the next day. She just moved slower, talked less, slept on the far edge of the bed. By the end of the week, she moved into the guest room, just for space, she said. Just a few nights. She made excuses for the silence. Said she was tired. Said she had deadlines. But the truth showed up in the smallest places. Her toothbrush stayed in the drawer. The coffee pot she used every morning stayed empty. She stopped playing music while she cooked. And me? I tried. God, I tried. I made dinner one night, her favorite. Roasted potatoes and lemon chicken with that sauce she always said tasted like home. I even folded the napkins the way she liked. She came in, saw the table, and turned around without a word. Another time, I left a note on her mirror. You still matter to me, even when you're quiet. She never mentioned it. Just wiped the mirror clean the next day. I bought her flowers and left them in the guest room. The next morning, they were gone. Not in the trash. Not in a vase. Just gone. And then came the worst moment. I was heading upstairs one night when I heard her laughing. Not a little laugh. A full, warm, unguarded laugh. I froze in the hallway. Her door was slightly open. She was on the phone, curled up on the bed, her voice light and easy. Mom, she said, still laughing. I'm fine. I promise. It's just tense. You know how he gets. I stepped back. You know how he gets. Like I was a problem. A pattern. A known nuisance. I didn't say anything. Just went back downstairs and stared at the wedding photo on the mantel. The one where we were dancing in the park under a string of cheap lights, smiling like idiots who didn't know how hard love could get. I looked at that picture and tried to remember what that version of us felt like. Tried to hear her laugh from back then, the way she'd toss her head back without checking who was watching. But all I could hear now was silence. The kind that buzzes behind your ribs and makes every room feel 10 degrees colder. I wasn't mad. Not exactly. I was something worse. Something hollow. Because I'd been here before. In a house full of walls. With people who dressed you up and sat you at their table but never actually saw you. The Ashcrofts never shouted. They just shut doors. And Rachel, the girl who once sat next to me in a lecture hall and said, I see you, had gone quiet, too. And I realized I was back in the mansion. Different walls. Same loneliness. Love, when it fades, doesn't always slam the door. Sometimes it just stops answering. Stops showing up. Stops fighting. And the scariest part? So did I. It was Rachel's idea. One last dinner, she said. For my parents. To reset things. I didn't want to go. Everything in me resisted the thought of sitting across from Cheryl and pretending I hadn't been humiliated in her house twice. But Rachel stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, voice tight. They invited you. I gave her a long look. Invited? Or tolerated? She didn't answer. Just said, please. Just this once. So I put on the suit. The charcoal one she said made me look like I belonged. And we drove there in silence, our hands not touching on the console between us. Dinner was at a place in Greenwich. A private dining room in the back of some upscale seafood spot. Waiters with napkins folded like origami. A single long table with crystal glasses that clinked even when you breathed near them. Rachel's brother and his wife were there. All smiles. Her dad sat at the head of the table, silent as usual. Cheryl was holding court, laughing, complimenting outfits, asking people about their flights like she hadn't spent the past year pretending I didn't exist. I tried to be polite, made small talk, pushed food around on my plate. Rachel looked beautiful, even in tension. She reached under the table once and squeezed my hand. I almost squeezed back. Then Cheryl stood up. She tapped her glass with her ring, the sound echoing through the room like a warning. I just want to say, she began, how proud I am of our family. Smiles, nods. We've come so far. And it's all thanks to the values we taught our children. More smiles. She looked at Rachel. I mean, just look at my daughter. Smart, accomplished, Married to a wonderful man. She paused. Then, with a smile sharper than a steak knife, she added, even if my son chose an orphan with no name, no history, well, some lessons take time. Silence. Utter silence. Rachel didn't react, didn't blink. Her fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. Her face, blank. I looked at her, waiting, begging, but she just stared at her plate like maybe the words would go away if she didn't move. Her dad muttered, "That's enough. Cheryl." Cheryl raised her glass like nothing happened. To growth. My stomach twisted. I turned to Rachel, my voice barely above a whisper. "Say something." She looked at me, just looked, and I could see it in her face, the war inside her, the part of her that wanted to defend me, and the part of her that wanted to keep the room calm. She chose the room, so I stood up, reached into my wallet, pulled out some cash. I folded it into her hand. "Go home," I said. "Don't make a scene." She looked at the money like it was poison. "What?" I leaned in. "You already made your choice." The room was staring. Cheryl looked amused. Rachel looked gutted. She didn't take the money. She took her pride. She stood up without a word, walked out without looking back. And I stayed there, at that long table full of whispers and wine glasses, knowing I had just lost her, not just from dinner, but from our life. Because sometimes the people you love most hand you the knife and expect you to say thank you. 3 days later, I was at work, trying to pretend like the silence in my apartment wasn't echoing louder than any phone ring. The photo from our wedding still sat on my desk. Us in the park, her in a sleeveless dress, me in a cheap suit she insisted looked cool in a vintage way. We were smiling like we actually believed love could beat everything. I was replying to emails when my assistant, Paula, poked her head in. "You should see this," she said, eyes wide. I looked up. "See what?" She turned her laptop toward me. A video was playing, something someone had posted to social. A birthday party, big event, white tent fancy. People clapping, a jazz trio in the background. Then the camera shifted, and there she was, Rachel, walking into the frame with two people I'd never seen before. Older, elegant, commanding presence. Her hand slipped around the woman's elbow like muscle memory. The caption read, "The Hawthorne's legacy continues. So proud of Rachel and the family she married into." The comments were blowing up. Didn't realize she was a Hawthorne now? Power move. They make such a stunning couple. I felt my chest go tight. I replayed it, slower. Watch her smile, the way she leaned in close to the older man. And then, halfway through a toast, he raised his glass and said, "To my daughter-in-law. To Rachel Hawthorne." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then it buzzed again. A text popped up. From her father. No explanation. No greeting. Just an attachment. A PDF. Divorce papers. Filed. Signed. Overnight. No drama. No accusations. Just done. It was like the world slowed down. My hands went cold. I couldn't feel the chair under me anymore. I just stared at the screen like it was lying to me. Then it hit me. She wasn't just Rachel. She was Rachel Hawthorne, as in Hawthorne Industries. Old money empire. East Coast royalty. One of the richest, most private families in the country. I'd heard of them, of course. Everybody had. I just never connected the dots. Because she'd never told me. Not once. I'd spent our entire relationship thinking I was the one with a legacy to protect, hiding her from the Ashcrofts, playing it safe, thinking silence was a shield. But she'd had her own empire, her own storm. And I treated her like she was fragile, like she was mine to hide. That's when the whispers in the office started. People passing my door slower than usual. I starting. Slack messages paused mid-sentence. I realized something too late. I hadn't married a poor girl trying to fit in. I'd married someone powerful and treated her like she was nothing. And in the end, she did what powerful people do. She walked out quietly and took everything with her. The first dip came the following Monday. I was still processing the divorce papers when I got a call from my family's financial advisor. "Eric," he said, voice tight, "we've got a problem." Hawthorne Industries had just pulled out of a deal. A big one. One the Ashcrofts had been banking on for months. And without that deal, two of our holding companies were suddenly on shaky legs. By Wednesday, the stock dropped 8%. By Friday, it hit 15%. Investors started calling. Not politely, not calmly. Calls full of panicked questions, thinly veiled threats. "What happened? Did you know? Why would Rachel do this?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. I hadn't seen it coming. One by one, people stopped calling to offer help and started calling to assign blame. My cousin, who hadn't texted me in 2 years, messaged me just to say, "Fix this. Fast." An email came from Meredith, formal, cold, with a CC list that stretched 4 names long. "You need to speak with Rachel immediately. This is spiraling." Alan called me that night for the first time in 6 months. Not to check on me, not to ask if I was okay, but to say, "You need to get ahead of this." I laughed. Actually laughed. Get ahead of what? I asked. The narrative, he said. She didn't make a statement. I replied. She didn't say a word. And you're still unraveling. Silence. He knew I was right. Rachel hadn't gone on TV. She hadn't trashed me online. She hadn't posted cryptic quotes or dramatic photos. She didn't even unfollow me. She simply left. And the world noticed. Because silence from someone that powerful? It's loud. My inbox filled with frantic messages. CEOs, partners, even old college friends suddenly checking in. But they weren't asking about me. They were asking about her. And when no one got answers, the whispers started. They said I drove her away. Said I embarrassed her. Said I married up and didn't know what to do with it. I didn't deny any of it. Because what could I say? That they were wrong? They weren't. I thought I was protecting my name by keeping quiet at her family dinners. Thought I was holding on to dignity by walking out of parties instead of speaking up. I thought silence was strength. Turns out, it was just cowardice with better posture. And now? The Ashcroft name was burning slow and steady, and all anyone wanted to know was what Rachel Hawthorne knew that made her walk away. They didn't want my answers. They wanted her silence. Because her silence said everything. She didn't post a statement. She didn't go on some revenge tour. She didn't even send a text. Rachel just left. 2 weeks after the divorce papers landed on my desk, she went abroad with her parents. The Hawthornes, the real ones. Not the people I used to imagine were just cold, rich snobs, but the ones who knew exactly how to make someone disappear from the public eye while still owning every room they entered. 6 weeks. For countries. I didn't know where she was until someone forwarded me a photo from a tabloid's travel section, not even the front page. Just a casual shot. Rachel in a sundress, standing outside a vineyard in France, sunglasses on, smiling at something out of frame. No caption, no tag, no drama. Just her. Free. And me? I came home to the same condo, same furniture, same framed wedding photo on the bookshelf, the one I still hadn't taken down. She was still laughing in that picture, the way she used to, the way she didn't anymore, not even in her sleep. I left it up, I think, because it was easier than admitting that every piece of her had already left me. People kept calling, business associates mostly, trying to figure out what happened, why the Ashcroft name was suddenly cursed in every meeting room. They didn't care about love or heartbreak. They cared about damage control. And all I could say was, I don't know. Because I didn't. I had spent so long trying to fit Rachel into the same box the Ashcrofts put me in, silent, polished, manageable, that I didn't realize she had been outgrowing me from the moment I let someone call her a guest. She didn't fight back. She didn't scream. She didn't need to. She found her peace. And that peace destroyed me. Because I finally understood, I wasn't the villain in some dramatic story. I was just nothing. The guy who stayed quiet while the people around him disrespected the only person who ever made him feel whole. The man who thought keeping the peace was the same thing as protecting love. Turns out, silence doesn't build a life. It buries it. And Rachel? She didn't hate me, but she didn't miss me either. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The girl everyone ignored had become the woman no one could touch. And the man who once thought he was saving his legacy? He ended up standing in the ashes. Alone. Silent. Forgotten.